How's everybody doing? Good? All right. So I'm Ken White, and here to talk about this crazy journey we've had so far called the Truecrypt audit. There's a great conversation, I guess, a few months ago with Jack Daniel. I wanted to put this up because I think it's awesome. Jeremy had sort of said, how do we sort of speak to the non-5% in the industry and in the people who are trying to learn about security? And this was Jack's response, and I thought it was great. So I certainly have a lot to share, but by no means do I want to put myself out there as sort of an encryption expert. But I've got maybe 30 slides or so, and then I thought we'd spend a fair amount of time answering questions because I know there's quite a few. So just a few things about me. I've got kind of a weird background. I guess a lot of us do. I started doing assembly language in like 5th grade, and I may or may not have penetrated the Sprint North American phone network. Was really influenced by some of the C papers in the early 90s on sort of fundamental constructions and overflows. I did some weird things in grad school with real-time signal analysis and everything from PET to MRI to iBlinks, and even did some stuff with satellite tracking. So a lot of work in imaging and signal analysis. Been doing information assurance and security for many, many years. The last couple I've been focused mainly on sort of life-critical systems, a few DoD systems, but not sort of, evil death gel kind of stuff, but more like, video systems and archiving, things like that. And I have been spending a while with the Software Engineering Institute, the Software Engineering Process Group, as they sort of think about and help people, with security lifecycle design and approaches. And it's been a great experience with them. I do a lot of work with cloud, sort of public infrastructure, cloud, Amazon, Google, and such, and lots of breaking. So yeah, this is up until a few weeks ago. I was doing things like this, working with cardiologists and analyzing signals for the heart to do drug safety. So happy to talk to people about all the weird things you can do with SVG if anybody's interested. And also, before we get too far into this, I think some of this is probably really old, hat for people. But if crypto or crypto engineering, protocol construction, if that's sort of something new, these are some classics that I'll leave online that are really worth taking a look at, especially the snake oil essay by Phil Zimmerman. So a little bit of the background. I imagine most people here have been following the surveillance stories pretty closely. I'm not going to go through all these, but just to say that one of the things that a lot of people in crypto engineering and sort of academic cryptography were really talking a lot about in the summer and fall were around some of the surveillance programs that were leaked, including particularly Bull Run. And so for people who aren't aware, this was a highly clandestine program with significant funding, and based on presentations that came out, it looked like the National Security Agency and other parts of the intel arms have kind of conflicting or dual roles. It's sort of like FAA, right? Because with the FAA, their role is to both promote air travel and to sort of help enforce air travel safety. Well, there's a signals arm of NSA which sort of focuses on defense, and there's also another arm that focuses on on offense. But what really struck people was this notion that there were people on NIST standards committees and in Internet Engineering Task Force committees that were critical positions that were intentionally undermining some of the core infrastructure systems and software, the fundamental underpinnings of things like random number generators, for example. So I mean, there's all sorts of kind of sociology and, privacy and First Amendment issues and things. But from a purely technical standard, one of the things that really got people in the academic cryptography world to stand up and take notice is when NIST came out and said, yeah, you know what, we're going to be reviewing our entire body of cryptographic work. So I think a lot of people have this idea that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is sort of just for, government kind of work, but it's not. They have a heavy influence on ISO standards, and because of business associations and other sort of strange consequences, things that come out of NIST have global impact. The President's Advisory Committee also came out and publicly said, we shouldn't be undermining the very fundamental encryption standards. In April, NIST just came right out and said, not only because of the criticism from people who know these things, but after our own internal review, we're pulling down the standard for a random number generator. That's a big deal. I don't know if I've got the quote here, but yeah, so there was language and guidance that basically said, vendors, if you're using this stuff, you've got about 1.5 years to transition off. Anyway, I think there's a whole talk around the EC curve and the random generators. But anyway, so let's talk about Truecrypt. So the best figures I've seen have been around 30 million downloads. It's an anonymous development team. Their license is considered controversial. It's literally on a list called forbidden items in the Debian and Fedora groups. The provenance of the code is kind of strange, and there's sort of a long history, but it's got a 10-year history. And it turns out that despite not very often updates from the code, having been around for 10 years, a lot of people use this stuff. So, sorry about the typo, attorneys, human rights workers, a lot of journalists, a lot of security people, and a lot of businesses, like small businesses that just need free software. No, big businesses. Big businesses use this. So this is a snapshot from the current docs for Amazon Web Services. If you want to do bulk import, export from AWS, that's what they use, Truecrypt. I mean, it's software that's used in a lot of places. But it turns out when we started looking at it and discussing it, nobody's ever really thoroughly audited the Windows version. And Windows matters because it's the one port for Truecrypt that has full disk, whole disk encryption. There had been some work that showed that the volume header was actually different between different platforms, and people had a hard time sort of reproducing the binary from the existing source. There had been a little bit, Bruce and some others had done some formal cryptanalysis on the deniability features of the software, but which were fairly weak. But nobody had done a formal analysis of the actual, core software, the fundamental code, as well as the crypto core. So late last year, Javier, and I've got a whole set of links on our website to this, found versions of Visual C and assembler and even some old RSA headers that are required to do this, and was able to reasonably reproduce it. There were a couple issues about timestamps and things of that sort, but the bigger concern that it just wasn't possible to reconstruct the binary files as they were being distributed, I think have been addressed. We've still got a few issues around that. And then again on the license. So, when Red Hat and the open software folks looked at this, it was actually formally applied by the Truecrypt team, I think in, I want to say 2004 or so, 2006, and they actually withdrew it. But because of some provisions in there that have to do with advertising clauses and things of that sort, the consensus at the time was, well, it's a non-free, non-OSS license. So, so those are some of the issues and some of the backgrounds. So people have seen this quote before, right? Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Well, in the crypto world, that's not really true, because you can have thousands of people, looking at code, but if they don't have deep subject matter expertise on not just the math, not just the protocol, chain, not just the constructions, but all of that, it's like a smaller and smaller universe of overlapping, expertise. This is from 1920. This was an 8-year-old in France that was playing, I think, 20 masters and beat them all. And so, we had these things going on with surveillance. We had the questions about, some of the fundamental standards. And there's a software that looks pretty reasonable. It's got kind of a quirky history and, some other issues. And so let's, if people actually relying on this, maybe we should see if it's, it's solid and trustworthy. So this really started by a Twitter conversation, and with me and Matt and a couple other people, the Grug and a few others. So I registered the domain, announced it on Twitter. Matt and I, kicked in a little bit. We set up a site through a group called Funfill. This went out. And then, I don't know, about a couple weeks later, maybe a week later, Matt put a blog up about it. And then the internet showed up, right? Because it turns out a lot of people were interested in this. And so it went. So we had the, it said, all right, well, let's raise some money. Let's try to, put some bug bounties out. Possibly let's, I don't know, maybe if we can, the dream would be to raise enough money to put together to have one of these sort of world caliber firms, take a look at this. But there's all the things that come with a crowdfunding community-driven thing, right? About Bitcoin and whether it's mobile friendly or not. So these are some of the paths we went on along the way. And then we decided to do perks, and it turns out it's complicated to ship things to 200 different countries. And we found a place that had 150 DVDs because we promised people that pledged, I think it was like $200 or so, that we'd do a signed copy of the Sneakers movie. So that was pretty cool. And then, because as I said earlier, the PayPal issue, we couldn't do that on Funfill. We set this up on Indiegogo as sort of a parallel thing. In the first day, I think in the first 12 hours, we raised $8,000. So this, it's a 60-day campaign. Like, wow. Most of it was coming through just regular donations, but there was the Bitcoin thing. So just to remind you, we're up 250% from the beginning of October to around the 10th of November. If you're sort of, doing some personal, playing, or you're doing arbitrage or whatever, that's fine. But when you've got money that's sort of donated and you've got a fiduciary responsibility, this is just, it's it's the stuff that can, just make your stomach ache whether you're doing the right thing or not. So there were some, big crunches in Bitcoin, and so it goes. So what we decided to do was sort of along the lines, having made 250%, I think, over the original values, we were sort of steadily, cashing that out. Whether or not that was a good idea or not, it's easy in retrospect, but I think it was a prudent thing to do. So anyway, after a few days of this, then the media got a hold of it, the mainstream outlets. And then, I checked one morning and there's $30,000 in the PayPal account. And it's like, well, this isn't just a couple of, a few $100 or $1,000 for a bug bounty, much less, enough for the thing. This is like sort of real money. And so, Matt and I talked, and we said, well, this, we're sort of winging this, but we need to actually set up a nonprofit because it doesn't make sense people donating money, and then we're going to end up paying a good percentage of that as through taxes. So we're in the process, and it's a painfully long process of setting up a 501c3, particularly when where you start isn't where you are maybe 6 months later with grants. We'll talk about that in a second. And so that's our logo we came up with. One of the most important things we did as soon as we realized this was legit and we were actually getting, the kind of community response and just overwhelming, support really across the world, we decided to reach out and put a technical advisory board together. So these are some names that I hope people recognize. Just really top subject matter experts in either crypto or security engineering or sort of legal and intellectual property issues around open source software. And then Marcia Hoffman, formerly with EFF, joined us on the board. And we had our first board meeting. This is how we roll. There's so many different pieces to the project, but one of them was, well, let's try to understand the provenance of the code and the history and sort of where people came from and how things came to be. So this was many nights and weekends of fun time for some of us putting these things together, because it turns out that as strange and sort of uncommon as the provenance goes in terms of the code and sort of something thrown up on SourceForge, there's actually this other weird element, which is there's an international trademark in Russia and France and the Czech Republic and Great Britain and the U.S. and several other countries. There were corporate papers, there were nonprofit papers, there were other trademark filings in the U.S. Around this, around the Truecrypt logo. And so it's strange because one aspect of it is sort of like just a sort of a typical kind of open source project that 10 years ago SourceForge was the thing, right? But then there was like all these legal protections. So we spent some time trying to figure that out. The donations kind of kept coming, and we realized, look, we've got to take this seriously. This is a significant amount of money. People are really putting their trust in this. This isn't just sort of a, let's throw some money out for bug hunting and things. We really had the possibility to do this right. We got contacted by a group called the Open Technology Fund, and they offered to match whatever money we would pay to do this audit, which was amazing. Again, there's a very small number of companies, of firms that have the engineers that sort of have the credibility that I think broadly would be trusted for this. And the thing is, you have to do this quietly, right? Because this is, I sort of have a skeptical side, and I've sort of seen lots of the dark underbelly of the net, and so I have a little skeptical side to me, but I don't think you can quite appreciate who comes out of the woodwork in a project like this. Some very colorful people, and we knew, and any potential partner knew, that this was going to be really, really scrutinized, right? Like no matter what you do, if you don't, if something doesn't turn up, there's going to be criticism. So, there were a couple of groups that just sort of, begged off and said, we don't want to get involved with this. There were a couple others that approached us sort of unsolicited, and, they just didn't have the right kind of profile. So this was one of the best reasons, or best sort of examples of the technical advisors, was sitting down and really thinking through. We've got a very, people have entrusted us with everything from $2, PayPal things from, students and all sorts of far-flung places to, really sizable individual donations. People are serious about this. We have to spend this, responsibly, and, we want to do the right thing. So we decided to go with ISEC Labs. And if you don't know much about them, it's worth checking them out. They've got a really amazing team. I mean, it's some of the most talented engineers I've ever worked with. So let's fast forward a little bit. So that was January, February. We finally came to terms on a work order and sort of the details of the audit and the assessment. And one of the things that we said was ISEC kind of incidentally can look at some of the crypto, and they would obviously point out things if they saw it, but they wanted to focus a lot on sort of the core foundation software, right? Because if you look at a lot of the major bugs, Heartbleed, the go to fail, these are basic software bugs. They have nothing to do with crypto. Obviously, they're going to look at things like random number generator and volume construction and things of this sort, but it wasn't going to be their focus, because it turns out 95% of the time doing the blockchain wrong is maybe the least of your problems. So they spent, I think, 6 weeks on this. with a couple of engineers dedicated full-time. So I don't know if you've done a lot of work with commercial security firms. That's a big deal. I mean, this was, we were meeting once or twice a week for a month and a half going over things they found. And it's, again, I can't say enough about the talent of this team. There's some incredible engineers. And in addition to the people who were doing it sort of directly, there was also a whole group of people that were doing peer review and sort of checking their work as well. So I think a lot of people know this, but just for those who may not be so aware, the final security assessment, they had some issues with weak volume header key derivation, right? So the password-based derived key, they felt like it didn't have enough iterations to sort of stretch the password properly. There were sensitive information that could be paged out from kernel stacks, right? So if you have someone that's got an open volume, they go to a web page, there's some JavaScript exploit or something that just starts, chewing up memory on Windows. It's a trivial, scenario to do something in a browser or other, other places that can exhaust memory in, one process, to the benefit of another. And so if this was the case, the issue was, well, there could be key material paged out from the kernel stacks. There's issues with bootloader decompressor, sort of the unzipping process. It's an older kind of, deprecated weird thing. But again, this is 10-year-old code. And then also there were some, what the Truecrypt team put in, they called sort of bonuses, security bonuses, to clear data. But as many of you know, it's really, really hard to assure, to prevent certain side channel attacks. And one of them is, okay, I've got a key, I've got a password, or I've derived a key, et cetera, I've done some manipulation, now wipe that data structure out. It's very difficult to do that well because compilers are really smart and they optimize a lot of that out, right? If you're just writing zeros, to an area, but you're not using it again, it's many, many times high-profile, software has just gotten burned that way. Truecrypt's team said, well, we're not, it was a bonus. We don't make any assurances. We use that just sort of as an extra measure. But anyway, the point was the overall findings were, there were, I think, 11 total findings, and about half were medium severity, but there was nothing, that showed any kind of evidence of tampering or intentional flaws. So what does that mean? Well, in this case, the vulnerabilities that they found, you'd have to have physical access to a mounted volume. So laptop or PC or whatever, it's got to be running, it's got to be, authenticated, the volume has to be attached, and then, if there's physical access, there's a chain of exploits that can be constructed, to recover the material. That's not part of the Truecrypt security model, and frankly, it's not really part of the security model for any of the major full disk encryption. The same vulnerabilities exist today for BitLocker and FileVault, right? And DMCrypt with Linux. There's a tool that's, I think it's like $300 or so. If your machine is running, it plugs in and does a DMA attack and pulls things out of memory. So if that's not promises that are made, then the other side of the security model, which is, okay, you've constructed either encrypted a file or a volume, entire disk, it's shut down, it's turned off, you're not able to recover physical memory. There's no evidence that there's any weakness from what they found. But again, they didn't look at the core crypto. They didn't look at the actual AES implementation, and these were all home brew, by the way. These were originally written. These weren't like from some software project that existed 10 years ago. They were written from scratch. So we got this report. This was like the end of April. And then, it's a great line by a song from John Lennon, right? Life's what happens when you're busy making other plans. Truecrypt org goes dark. So version 7.2, it was released. It was signed with developer keys that looked legit. The cert was updated, but it expired anyway. The software that was put on SourceForge is read-only. You can't create new volumes, and the entire archive is taken offline. This is really painful because one of the things that attract a lot of people to TrueCrypt is the documentation was really good. The examples were really good. The interface was really well done. It was simple. It was, grandpa friendly. It was, it was nice, usable software. And then there were some weird things about, here's some, if you're not using Windows, here's some alternatives. But I think like in the Mac version, they chose no cipher or something in like one of the screenshots for, putting an encrypted volume together. Right, and then so there's a redirect. So if you go to Truecrypt.org, it redirects back to SourceForge, and you get this ugly error about Truecrypt's not secure, may contain unfixed security issues. So, we talked, many of us did some, deep thinking and consideration, and basically the conclusion we came to was, that's sort of strange, and we'll take a look at it. There are a lot of scenarios that could explain that. There are a lot that we just have no idea what could be going on. We promised the people who are supporting the project to do an audit. We're going to do this audit. So we're doing that. So we created a trusted repository up on GitHub, and I think it's already been forked 170 times now. We did triple signature checks. So if somebody's, broken SHA-256, SHA-1, and MD5 in conjunction, we're host anyway. But I think the binaries are pretty well to be trusted. And Thomas and Nate are leading phase 2. Thomas had an illness last week, but I think in the next week or so it's going to be announced the details of it. It's not going to be as much driven by a professional services firm. We may have an element of that, but they're going to be substantial bug bounties. We still have a fair amount of money because we did get some additional sort of late contributions from CERT, Austria, and from a couple of individuals. And then obviously there's lots of questions about, well, what do we do after the audit? So we're thinking about that. People are probably aware there's been lots of sites pop up that offer the software. There's a group in Switzerland that looks like they're they've got a pretty decent plan, but even in that case, they said, we're going to wait till the OCAP audit's over, and then we're going to sort of go forward. Our organization's not in a position, we're not structured to do development, right? It's possible, one scenario, and we haven't committed to this, but one scenario is we might be able to do some kind of financial support for a trusted fork. People use this, they rely on it, and because the site went dark, it's not like millions of people just stopped using it that day. So lots of questions and challenges. Where are we now? So as I said, the report's out there online. We're doing phase 2. We're specifically looking at the other platforms, the Mac and Linux piece. We have, I'm not exaggerating, the best attorneys in the world on intellectual property and trademark issues looking to see what our options are, if any. It is a very unconventional license. It literally has language in there about we won't sue you or we will sue you. It's very odd language. So we're looking forward. Before we jump into some questions, though, I want to kind of just recap a couple things. So because we get this a lot, like why are you, there's, and then people will name off 6 different, Linux or open source things now that sort of exist. But why are you even auditing this? We read this stuff, it worries us, we respond the way we respond, be that through, activism, through policy, through influence of our, elected leaders. But this is not the threat model. If you're being specifically targeted by a nation state, So, but let's talk about audits in general. Like, we just use, trusted, well-known software, right? You can't do everything, right? You can't audit down to the firmware. You can't audit down to the fab. At some point you have to trust. So there's this lovely person named Simon Butcher, who lives in the UK, I think, and he registered a domain called simonbutcher.name. If you run Chrome or Chromium, you cannot go to his personal homepage without ensuring that it's SSL. I think that's lovely. Why is this in the Chrome source code? There are dozens, maybe hundreds of specific people who, I'm not even sure the mechanism exactly, but they've pinned it. Like I get Facebook or Twitter But why is Simon Butcher? Like, okay, I've seen his website. It's a fine website, but it's like cooking and stuff. Like, what? I mean, so there's weird things in code, right? So people, I think, know generally about this, the what's it called, the munitions limits or whatever on export controls. So this was, 10, 12 years ago. There were still laws, and there still, to some degree, exist some laws that said you can't export crypto code from out of the U.S. into other countries. This is from February. So if you download Red Hat or CentOS or Fedora, it's literally called Hobble-OpenSSL. And there are certain constructions and certain things that are not available to you. This is 2014. So, we need to be vigilant. We need to keep looking at these things. And again, it bears repeating. This is Magnus Carlsen. He was playing, I think it was 10 Harvard Law grads who were fairly well-rated chess players. He played them blindfolded. My point with this is there are going to be students from Italy who are going to do incredible things with exploit chains that we haven't even thought about before, and that's awesome. But there's also 100 people on random forums and blogs who are grumpy people and are certain they know all about crypto and haven't the first idea about crypto. I don't want to spend a lot of time about Heartbleed except to say one thing. It obviously got a lot of attention. It obviously was butchered really badly, the interpretation in the press. But so one of the conventional wisdoms is, right, with elliptic curve crypto, perfect forward secrecy, these are all good things, right? So the idea is that if there's a key compromise, you're doing an a TLS connection to a remote resource, you've used really strong crypto, all the proper things, no. So strong crypto with a core bug in the software, this is really bad. So in the case of Heartbleed, this was one of the worst kinds of catastrophic crypto or catastrophic security bugs. I think Matt Blaze put it well. He said, not only is it leaking your information, it's leaking other people's information, right? So here's an example where with a trace, we're making a PFS call to a remote site, and I'm pulling back. This is from one of my servers, data that's 8 hours old. Credentials, username, password is pwned, PHP session ID, right? So it's really hard to do these things properly. I'm not even getting into commercial vendors, because if you see this, run away, right? Usable crypto is really hard. I've got advanced degree and graduate work in computational neuro. I have no idea how to answer that dialogue problem. I mean, and this is from Moxie, right? So I think I trust him fully. Maybe I trust him ultimately, but how about Matt Green? Do I trust him? What is that? And trust itself is complicated, right? So Peter, if you don't follow him on Twitter, if you're on Twitter, he's one of the most brilliant people I've known in sort of applied security engineering. He works for Amazon. He put this out recently. There are 4,900 transitive trusts in the certificate authorities, the root authorities for Microsoft and Mozilla. Think about that. So it's not just sort of a hypothetical issue. What does that really mean? I don't know if you guys can see it on the screen so well. I'm not making this up. If you have an iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, you are trusting this cert. I have no idea who that is. I think they're in, I don't know what country this is. Because it's, yeah. Anyway, we can do this. So, pause. All right, ask me anything. What is my favorite beer? I'm not a beer guy. Sam Adams? Sorry. Right, so we have a contact it's not quite like you walk up to a mailbox with a piece of chalk and like wipe it, and then like, you know, somebody opens a candle in a window. It's not quite that, but it's almost there, right? So we do have a contact on the Truecrypt team, and the last we had heard through that channel was, appreciate the audit, thanks for the good work, looking forward to see the results of phase 2. The thing that's difficult about an anonymous development team is it's an anonymous development team. It's very hard to verify authenticity through untrusted channels. Now, having said that, when the story sort of finally comes out later, I mean, I think people will, you know, I think they'll understand the balance that we have to do, right? Because what we don't want to do is, it's easy to say, you know, let's sort of crowdsource the, you know, doxing of this thing and like figure out who these people are. On the other hand, think really carefully about why it is in 2003, 2004, if you're a 26, 28-year-old developer, why would you be so concerned about anonymity? Is it possible that, you know, your parents' generation came from regimes where they were killed, right? So some people would say, well, you know, but if we're to trust, we need to know the provenance of the code. We really need to understand who this is. The data is all out there, but I would really caution people. Doxing has, you know, it's two sides. I think you just need to look at the Satoshi thing to realize that, right? I mean, Newsweek just got that wrong, and there are public faces of the team through the legal and you know, sort of financial and tax records that one could trace, but it doesn't really tell you who the rest of the team is. It is a small team, but no, after the shutdown there was a brief exchange, and I think the unfortunate answer is it may just be silent. It may just be completely unresolved. We may just not know. There have been some efforts made to, you know, to reach out as directly, but you know, as you know, respectfully as we can. If people want to be private, they're going to be, you know, they're going to be private. Is it dead? Well, it's no less secure now than it was 2 weeks ago, right? It's not a coincidence that a lot of former national security and sort of, you know, intelligence people, you know, use it themselves. If someone has found, you know, some way around closed volume encryption, that's very valuable. Nothing we've seen indicates that. And one of the other questions we get sometimes is, you know, what was already kind of a dying project, they only update every year or two. This isn't consumer desktop, you know, like, you know, playlist software. This is really stable code. I think, I mean, it's all speculation. It is the case with Windows 8.1. It's, you know, there's not a real technical path there because of the TPM. XP was end of life. I don't think it's just that. I think there's other things going on. But the messages that came back were very confused. It was sort of, it was almost as if even within the team it wasn't clear who some of the other people are. But, you know, that's the thing about math, is it doesn't matter who wrote it. It is what it is, right? So we can't say this is, you know, a safe piece of software. What we can say is we looked at X, Y, and Z, and we didn't find anything. And we had people who are really, really good at this look at it really hard and do these things, and we came up short or didn't. And I think that's the best we can do. I think the team in Switzerland is onto something, but frankly, you know, somebody's taken a fairly big risk by forking it until, you know, they get competent advice from counsel, because, you know, somebody had put some resources behind protecting the logo and the, you know, the commercial clause. I mean, Matt sort of joked that, you know, it'd be great if we could just get the GUI and like the, you know, the volume crypto, because everything else we can rebuild. But there's just not a lot of great alternatives for truly easy to use, friendly crypto that works cross-platform. again, there's I use DMCrypt. DMCrypt's great. There's, I know the TC Play. I know the major, alternatives and things. Those are there, but it doesn't really address the journalists and the human rights workers of the world who are using Windows, and that's the reality. It's pretty rock solid. I mean, there were, the ISEC team said, there are some, how did they put it exactly? There were places where things were sort of sloppy in the way that they're laid out, but it's also actually remarkably well documented. And, it's complicated. I think there's 32,000 lines of C in assembly. I mean, it's a big piece of software. Plus, I mean, any of us, if you looked at code you wrote 10 years ago, I mean, it's been my experience that sort of, really carefully designed, almost like academic level software, you just don't see that often. I mean, people criticize OpenSSL, for example, but it wasn't really designed. It sort of evolved, and I think we see a lot of that. I'd love to see, clean, better code. It's not for lack of the primitive libraries, right? I mean, the Sodium and some of these others are awesome, but they don't, well, at least in the case of, sort of a full range suite of software, there may be a cipher chain, but maybe not MIME, maybe not, the PKI element and things. But I don't know, maybe I'm jumping more into the OpenSSL thing than Truecrypt. It seems to do what it does well. There were some places where things were difficult to follow. Also, what you'd consider deprecated in 2014 wasn't deprecated when it was written, right? And so it was sort of trying to figure out whether things were, how would I say, sort of typical of the period they were written in, or were they, when there were sort of strange constructions, was it because, was something, to sort of stand out, unusually so. There was a combination of fuzzing, static analysis, of, all the traditional mechanisms you go through. So we have what we have so far. I'm really excited about this next phase with that Thomas and Nate are doing. I think if you're familiar with the Crypto Challenge, I don't know if people are aware of that. You should check it out. They have Thomas and his group there have done an amazing job with that, and they're really some of the top caliber security engineers in the world. So the privacy sort of advocate side of me says, I hope so. The security engineer side of me says, well, we'll see. So the question is, when does it make sense to just start over with something we can formally verify? I don't know. There are crypto libraries that had formal cryptanalysis. There are some people that are really pushing hard for an F# library. It's had an incredible amount of scrutiny and formal verification. Will that ever work, say, as an embedded replacement for OpenSSL or GNU SSL or GNU TLS? I don't think so. One of the lessons that came out of this was it's really difficult to do this part-time and sort of on the side. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons we engaged a commercial firm was to completely dedicate, a fixed amount of time with security engineers. But this is, people have been pretty patient, but occasionally we get questions about, can you guys hurry up? I mean, this has been a purely volunteer thing. I think it would be great. I just don't see a lot of examples anywhere of, of truly, from the ground, cleanly written, widespread libraries. I mean, Matt jokes that, we're going to, OpenSSL runs on the space shuttle, and it's true. It does. It's there. We will, keep crunching and making it better and improving, and who knows, maybe, maybe the next major release in 5 years is, benefits from all the work the OpenBSD guys are doing. I don't see anything like that on the Truecrypt side, because a lot of the people who are really good at, say, the Linux file systems and things could care less about Windows. Most journalists aren't going to be using Ubuntu, right? Most journalists and attorneys and civil rights activists, you could argue they should, but they're not. And so, it is what it is. No, 100% of the funds that were raised are purely for the audit. We're not doing any development. And arguably the only thing that really might make sense is to increase the iteration count for the derived key. If you set your password to foo, I can do, KDF 10,000 times, but if it's a reasonably decent length, strong key or strong passphrase, you're fine. The others, I think those are sort of icing on the cake, because if someone's doing an evil-made attack, if they've got physical access to your machine, yeah, maybe there's 2 vectors that can sort of, page things out and expose key material, but there's already 5 other ways to get that, to sort of go down that exploit path. The response from the Truecrypt team, by the way, we did give them the full report for, for a chance for their reaction and any kind of response, was, it's a time trade-off, right? They didn't want to wait several extra seconds every time, volumes were accessed. And again, the derivation key count, it's I think the phrase is, stretching, the key material. If you get a bad password, a triple chain isn't going to really mitigate that much. So, but that's a long way of saying no. Okay. Right. No, I actually think that's very plausible. But the strange part is the way things were shut down, the claim that all keys were destroyed, and that even other members of the team don't have access to the website anymore. That's kind of odd. Also, yeah, there are just a few things that are sort of strange. I don't know what to make of that. Windows 8.1 is not a path forward for this, because the TPM, yeah, I hope we find out, but I'm not sure we will. I suspect it's very close to that, but maybe there's some other things going on too. Nobody asked, but for the record, and we put this online too, we've not been served or noticed with any sort of government orders or requests or on the audit, nor is ISAC, and we've got PGP signed statements to that effect as well, if people are curious if any agencies got to us. Yeah, I mean, there's questions about jurisdiction, right? I mean, One of the people who's associated with this has had addresses both in California and in the Czech Republic. So, if they're not a U.S. national, I don't know. And it's, it is not one person. We do have, there's very clear interviews and chains of email threads and things that it began at a minimum of 2 people. So I don't think it's 20, but it's not one person. Yeah, I mean, there was a sort of a non-official channel where part of the conversation was, how was it put exactly? Something like, I'm not even sure if, if person X has that anymore, meaning access to the site. It's just, it almost was as if the current, the current sort of organization is that there's anonymity within the group, at least among some of them. That's sort of unusual. Well, I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean. Oh, sure. I mean, most of the not controversy, but most of the discussion and internal debate was post-audit. There was almost no discussion about whether we do the audit or not. I mean, the fact is, people contributed money to audit this code, so that's what we're going to do. What I meant was we're not really organized to do development. We have been in contact with people who are very interested in trusted code, in properly vetted software for a range of other issues. I didn't talk about it, but we're doing a presentation at DEF CON coming up on the core infrastructure initiative with the Linux Foundation. They're extremely interested in that broadly, but no, for Truecrypt, I mean, I think we're gonna shelve those discussions till later. I mean, I am aware that there are 1 or 2 Windows specific sort of not clones, but packages that do something similar. But I'm not. We haven't seen anything that works cross-platform the same way that's compelling. And if something's pure command line, that's just a non-starter, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Bash. That's my days are spent shell scripting, but that's that doesn't help the the attorneys and the users and the rights activists that use this stuff. So what am I supposed to do with this again? I'll answer your question. Anything else? I do not work for the NSA. No, most of the work I do these days is for the World Health Organization and what's called NGOs. So I'm doing some stuff with vaccine trials and some other work, but no, not NSA. And starting in a week or two, then I'll get a modest stipend from the Linux Foundation to help with their projects, but they've got some bold ambitions. I mean, not just OpenSSL, which, by the way, is auditing OpenSSL is a major project, but if you've read the releases, the OpenSSH project in TP Daemon, multiple other projects are going to be reviewed. Because one of the things that came, obviously, from Heartbleed was sort of what I think many of us knew for a long time, which was there's a soft underbelly that is everywhere, right? I mean, it's on home routers, it's on cable routers, it's in, anesthesia machines. I mean, that people didn't quite seem at a higher level to realize. So, no, I think there's an extreme interest in informally validating the code that's become critical to what we use. More? All right. Thanks, everyone.